Wyoming Territory, 1879. The first snow came early that year, dusting the high plains white as Margaret Jensen clawed her way out of the cellar her husband had thrown her into 3 nights before. Her fingers bled from the splinters in the wooden trapdoor. Her baby, tucked against her chest inside her coat, whimpered but did not cry. She had begged him to stay quiet. The wind bit through her thin clothes as she stumbled across the pasture behind the house, past the barn he never finished building. The moon lit the way, silver on frost. One boot was missing. She had no time to look for it when she ran. Her husband, Wade, had locked her down there after she told him she was leaving. He had laughed, then shoved her down the steps, bolted the door, and left her with nothing but a bucket and the baby. She had waited until he rode into town for whiskey, then pushed until the hinge cracked. Now she was running. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to get away. She held her baby tighter, felt the small warmth against her chest. "We're going to be fine," she whispered. "We're going to be fine, Boone." She had named him Boone after her father, the only man who ever showed her real kindness. He had died the spring before she married Wade. If he had lived, none of this would have happened. The road was just a wagon trail, hard to follow in the snow. But she kept walking. Her bare foot went numb, her legs ached, but she did not stop. When the sky began to lighten, she saw smoke rising over the ridge, a cabin. She nearly collapsed with relief. She made it to the porch, pounded on the door with her fist. "Help," she rasped. "Please." The door opened fast. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, with a rifle in one hand and caution in his eyes. His shirt was half-buttoned and his dark brown hair was still tousled from sleep. Then he saw the baby and lowered the rifle. "Jesus," he said. "Come inside." She swayed on her feet. "Do not send me back." "I am not sending you anywhere," he said, stepping aside. "Come on." She stumbled in and dropped to her knees near the fire. He shut the door behind her, bolted it. The cabin was warm, smelled like coffee and pine smoke. "Sit here," he said, dragging a chair closer to the fire. "Let me get you something." She sat, cradling Boone close. Her teeth chattered. Her whole body shook. The man returned with a blanket, wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he crouched down, looked her in the eye. "My name's Callum Dorsey," he said. "I live out here alone. You are safe now, I swear it." She stared at him. His voice was steady, low. She believed him. "I'm Margaret," she said. "Margaret Jensen. This is my son, Boone." Callum nodded, eyes flicking to the baby, then back to her. "Margaret." "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No, just cold, just tired." He stood, moved to the stove, poured her a tin cup of coffee. "I got stew left from last night. You can eat, rest, then we will figure things out." She took the cup with both hands. It burned her palms, but she did not let go. Her throat was raw as she sipped. Callum watched her, then crouched by the fire again. "That baby yours?" "Yes." "His father do that to you?" She nodded. Callum looked at the flames, jaw tight. "You ran." He locked me in the cellar. "I got out last night." "How far did you walk?" "All night." He exhaled slowly. "You and the boy can stay here. I will not let anyone take you back." Margaret blinked fast. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." He stood. "You hungry?" She nodded. "Yes." "Thank you." He served her food without asking more questions. She ate with one hand, the other holding Boone close. The stew was thick and hot and tasted like something real. She had not eaten in days. Afterward, he showed her the bed in the back room. "You and the baby take it." "I will sleep out here." "You do not have to. I want to," he said. "You need rest." Margaret hesitated. "You are kind." "I try to be." She stood in the doorway a minute, watching him stoke the fire. His shoulders were strong, his hands steady. He moved like someone who had been alone a long time and did not mind it, but did not hate people either. She went to the bed and laid Boone beside her. He slept deeply now, warm at last. She stared at the ceiling until her eyes closed. When she woke, it was dark again. The fire still burned. Boone slept on. She rose quietly, stepped into the main room. Callum sat at the table, carving something small from a piece of wood. He looked up. "You slept near 12 hours, he said. "I needed it." "I figured." She walked to the fire. "Thank you for not asking too much." "I figure you will tell me what you want to tell me when you want to tell it." She looked at him, really looked. His face was strong but not hard. He had a scar along his jaw, like an old knife wound. He had seen things, probably done things, but his eyes were gentle. You live out here alone, for 5 years now. Why? Had a ranch outside of Cheyenne. My brother died, I left it behind, she nodded. That was all he said. She respected that. He stood, poured her another cup of coffee. Handed it to her, their fingers brushed, something small passed between them, just a flicker, a warmth. She looked at her hand, then up at him. He stepped back, gave her space. I will keep you safe, he said softly. Her throat tightened. You already have. They stood like that, quiet, the wind howling outside. Inside, the fire crackled low and steady. Boone stirred in the back room, then went quiet again. I should not have come here, she whispered. I am glad you did, he said. She looked at him. He meant it. She saw it clear as day. Something new settled in her chest. Not fear, not panic, hope, real hope. She wrapped her fingers around the warm tin cup, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself breathe. The second morning came gray and windless, the kind of still that made the world feel like it was holding its breath. Margaret stood at the window, one hand resting lightly on Boone's back where he lay swaddled in a dry flour sack she'd sewn into a blanket last night with thread from Callum's mending kit. His tiny chest rose and fell steady against her palm. Outside, the snow had crusted to ice. The fence line was half buried. A lone mule deer picked its way along the edge of the woods before vanishing into the trees with a twitch of its tail. She hadn't spoken much since arriving, but a silence like that couldn't last. Not forever. Callum was out back splitting kindling. She could hear the rhythm of the axe, clean and sure, not hurried, not angry, just work. The sound settled something inside her. She turned from the window and tucked the blanket tighter around Boone, then walked into the main room. The coals in the stove still held heat. She opened the door, added 2 small logs from the stack, and used the poker to stir the embers until flames took again. When Callum came in, his boots left wet prints on the floorboards. His coat was dusted with ice, and his gloves were stiff with cold. I'll mop that, she said before he could say anything. He set the axe by the door, not bothered by it. You sleep? Some, he nodded and pulled off his gloves. I shot a rabbit at first light. Figured I'd skin it now, stew it later. She hesitated, then said, I can help with that. You sure? I've done worse. He didn't ask what, just passed her a clean cloth and led her to the back stoop where the rabbit waited on a flat board. She watched how he held the knife, how he made swift work of the skin without wasting the meat. She took over when he offered the second one, her hands steadier than she expected. You got family anywhere? He asked, not looking up. None that'd take me in. Friends? No, she paused. He saw to that. Callum didn't speak for a moment, just poured a bucket of snowmelt over the board to wash it clean. I know a woman in Medicine Bow, he said slowly. Widow named Lisa Cobb runs a dry goods store. She keeps a cot in the back for women passing through. If you wanted, I don't. The words came sharper than she meant. She eased her tone. Not yet. He didn't press. He just nodded and carried the rabbit meat inside. She followed, wiped her hands on her skirt, and fetched the stew pot from its hook. He gathered onions from a sack beneath the counter and handed her a small paring knife. As she peeled and chopped, she found her voice again. Why'd you leave Cheyenne? He seemed to weigh the question. My brother and I ran cattle. He was younger, got into cards, drink. One night he got shot leaving a saloon. I buried him myself. After that, the place soured. She didn't speak, just stirred the rabbit into the pot with the onions and herbs from a jar on the shelf. I tried sticking around, he added, but nothing fit after. Margaret glanced at him. And this does, he shrugged. I don't mind quiet. She tasted the stew with the edge of a spoon. It needed salt. He passed her the tin without asking. Callum, she said after a long pause, if he comes, he won't find you here. But if he does, I'll deal with it. His tone didn't rise. He wasn't boasting, just stating a fact. She looked at him then, really looked. There was no cruelty in him, no boastfulness, just steadiness. Like the earth under her feet hadn't shifted for once, Boone began to fuss. She moved to the bed and lifted him, rocking gently. His cheeks were pink with warmth, his eyes still bleary with sleep. She kissed the top of his head. You want me to hold him while you eat? Callum asked from behind her. She blinked. You don't have to, I know. She weighed the offer, then passed Boone into his arms. Callum took the child with surprising ease, settling him against one shoulder, supporting the head like he'd done it before. Margaret sat and ate slowly. The stew was hot, filling. Her hands stopped trembling partway through. Boone let out a soft sigh against Callum's chest. He patted the baby's back absently, looking down at the small bundle as if memorizing the weight of him. "You've held a baby before," she said. "I've got 3 nieces back in Missouri, my sister's girls, spent a summer helping out after her man died." Margaret nodded. When Boone drifted off again, Callum laid him back in the crook of the bed and stepped away without waking him. "You planning to stay long?" he asked, voice low. "I don't know. You don't have to decide now." She looked at the fire, then at him. "I don't know what I'd even do next." "I can't go back. I don't want to hide forever, neither. You could stay," he said. "There's space." She studied him. "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" "I don't think you're a stranger anymore." Something in her chest cracked, not painful, more like a thaw. She looked away before it showed too plain on her face. "I'll help with chores," she said. "If I stay, I pull my weight." I'd expect nothing less. That night, when the wind picked up again, she lay beside her son and listened to the steady sound of Callum's boots moving across the floor outside the bedroom, the creak of the chair near the fire, the occasional clink of a cup set down soft. She did not sleep easily, but when she did, she dreamed of nothing at all. And that, for once, was a mercy. Margaret sat on the porch steps with Boone bundled in her lap, the morning sun weak but bright against the frost-glazed trees. The wind had calmed since yesterday, and a single raven watched them from the fence post, silent, unmoving. She hadn't expected the quiet to feel so strange after so much noise in her life: slammed doors, shouted names, boots pacing overhead. Now every sound stood out: the creak of trees, Boone's soft breaths, the scrape of a shovel from the side yard. Callum was digging narrow trenches beside the cabin, the kind used to direct meltwater away before spring thaw. He worked in silence, sleeves rolled, hat pulled low. She hadn't asked him to do anything special that morning, but he'd left her a folded shirt on the table, one of his old ones, clean and patched at the elbows. It fit loose, but it was warm. She hadn't mentioned it aloud. Some things didn't need saying. Boone stirred and fussed. She rocked him gently, humming without thinking. The tune came from somewhere deep, something her mother used to sing when the river ran high and the windows rattled. She hadn't thought of that house in Idaho since she left at 17. Callum stepped up onto the porch with a slow gait. His boots were caked with frozen mud and his hands were raw from the spade. "Mind if I sit?" She shifted Boone and nodded toward the other end of the step. "If you don't mind baby noises." "I've heard worse," he said, sitting down. He kept his eyes on the trees like he didn't want to crowd her. "Your lands stretch far?" she asked after a while. "Runs to that ridge yonder. Creek marks the edge. No neighbors nearer than 12 miles. She looked toward the trees. "No wonder you don't get visitors." "Not the worst thing in the world." She waited. "You ever get lonely?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Some days, but I figure it's earned. You live quiet, you get quiet back." She nodded once. "I thought I wanted quiet too. Turns out I wanted peace. They're not the same." He glanced at her. "You think you can find peace here?" "I think I can try." Boone let out a hiccup and blinked up at Callum. The child's hand reached clumsily in his direction, fingers grasping open and closed. Callum leaned forward slightly. "Mind if I?" Margaret adjusted Boone and passed him over. Boone settled easily in Callum's arms, eyes wide and curious now. "He's sturdy," Callum said. "He's had to be." Callum ran a finger along Boone's mittened hand. "He got your eyes." Margaret looked down at her lap. "That's what I'm afraid of." Callum didn't ask what she meant. He just adjusted Boone's weight and held him steady. "You ever think of leaving Wyoming?" she asked. "Used to. Thought about heading to Oregon once. Heard the land's soft there, good for fruit trees, but I never did." "Why not?" he shrugged. "Didn't have a reason strong enough to go. Or anyone to go with." She drew her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, her breath clouded in the cold air. "If I start over, I want to do it honest, not hiding, not running, just steady." "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," he said, not looking at her. "I'm not a burden, Callum. I never said you were." "I mean, I don't want to be one." He looked over then, and his voice had a new edge, quiet but firm. Margaret, if I thought you were a burden, I wouldn't have let you through my door. She held his gaze. Then maybe I could earn my place here. You already have. They sat quiet again. Boone had fallen back asleep on Callum's shoulder, mouth slack, cheek rosy. Margaret watched the rise and fall of his tiny chest, and her throat tightened. You ever lose someone? She asked. Callum nodded slowly. My ma when I was 15, then my brother. After that, I stopped letting folks in close. She traced the edge of her boot with her finger. I lost myself somewhere in the middle of trying to make that house a home. He glanced at her, brow furrowed. You didn't lose yourself. Someone tried to take you, that's different. She held that in her chest for a long moment. I don't know who I am without looking over my shoulder. Well, he said, voice low, maybe you don't have to figure it out all at once. Boone stirred again, and Callum stood to carry him back inside. Margaret followed, arms crossed tight against the cold. Later that afternoon, she found a small patch of frozen earth behind the shed and began clearing it with a short-handled hoe. She didn't ask if she could, she just did it. Callum came around the corner, saw what she was doing, and didn't say a word. Just handed her a second tool and started digging beside her. By sundown, they had turned enough soil for a spring garden. They didn't talk much while they worked, but when the last light faded and the air grew sharp again, she looked up from the dirt-streaked spade and caught his eyes. Neither of them smiled, but something shifted, and it stayed shifted. The creek thawed in the second week of March, thin trickles of water threading through the icy banks. Margaret stood near its edge, one hand resting on the strap of the basket slung over her shoulder, the other steadying Boone on her hip. The child had grown heavier these past weeks, his limbs filling out, his gaze more curious than ever. He reached now for the glint of water, fingers splayed, and she shifted him higher, laughing under her breath. I know, she whispered. It's all new. Behind her, the sound of a creaking yoke signaled Callum's approach. He was leading the mule cart, the bed piled with chopped alder branches and a coil of rope, his steps slow from the mud. He wore a new patch on his coat's right shoulder, her stitching, neat and small. He hadn't commented on it when she mended it 2 nights ago, only nodded once and worn it since. He stopped beside her, gaze flicking to Boone before settling on her face. Water's running early, he said. I remember that meaning a dry summer. Could be. Depends how fast the snow goes up in the hills. She looked down at the creek again. I'd like to plant beans near the fence. The ground's soft there, he nodded. We can fence it against deer. The word we had started slipping into their talks more often, unremarked but solid. She didn't point it out. She liked it better that way. She shifted Boone to her other side. Is the Cobb woman still writing you supply letters? Once a month, he said. She asked about you last time. Margaret raised an eyebrow. What you say? That you were well, busy. Not planning to pass through. She tilted her head. Was that your guess or mine? He looked at her then, the corner of his mouth tugging in something near to a smile, though not quite. Didn't feel like guessing. A breeze stirred the hem of her skirt. She turned to face him fully. You said once you don't mind quiet. What happens if quiet turns into something else? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he unhooked the mule's harness and gave the animal a slow rub between the ears before stepping closer. Close enough she could see the faint line of sunburn along his collar. I don't mind a change in weather, he said. Boone fussed, twisting in her arms. She bounced him gently and glanced toward the cabin. He needs to be fed. I'll finish the stacking, Callum said, reaching for the basket on her shoulder. She let him take it, their fingers brushing. Inside, she settled Boone into the cradle Callum had built from leftover cedar slats. She nursed him in silence, watching how the light shifted across the plank floor. When he drifted off, she wrapped him again and laid him down, brushing a curl from his forehead. In the kitchen, she found Callum pouring oats into a tin scoop, measuring for the mule. You ever think about bringing cattle back here? She asked. He glanced over. Not with just one man. What if it wasn't just one? He dried his hands on a cloth. You asking about work or about staying? I don't think I separate those anymore. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I never built this place with the thought of someone else in it, but it hasn't felt crowded. She stepped closer, folding her arms to match his. I haven't felt afraid here, not once. That's not something I ever thought I'd say standing in a man's kitchen. He met her eyes. You're not standing in a man's kitchen. You're standing in your own house if you want it. She didn't look away. I want it. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The only sound was the wind teasing the eaves and the faint creak of Boone shifting in his sleep. I'm not easy, she said. I get quiet when I'm hurt, and I don't know how to ask for things. I don't need easy. I need true. She felt it then, a slow warmth blooming inside her chest, not sudden but certain. I want to build something, she said, not just survive. Callum reached out, his hand closing gently around hers where it rested on the counter. Then let's build it together, she nodded once. Together. Outside, the wind lifted through the trees, carrying the scent of thawing earth and alder smoke. Inside, she stood beside him, her hand in his, the silence between them no longer empty but full. The soil warmed sooner than expected. By early April, Margaret had peas pushing through the furrows behind the shed and rows of onion starts leaning toward the sun. Her apron was stained with damp earth and the green tint of crushed stems. Boone sat nearby in a wooden box Callum had repurposed with a blanket and straw lining. He gnawed on the corner of a corn husk doll Margaret had stitched with leftover scraps, gumming it with solemn determination. Callum passed through the gate with 2 lengths of fence rail balanced across his shoulder. He set them beside the others, brushing dirt from his palms. Stock buyer came through the south trail yesterday, he said as he crouched to check the line of the posts. Left a note under the salt rock, left-handed fella, signs with a cross. Margaret leaned on her hoe. You thinking about getting a few head, 3, maybe 4, nothing big. Just enough to keep grass down and bring in a little extra come fall. She nodded. I could churn the butter if we had a cow. He looked over his shoulder. You want a cow? I want cream in my coffee and milk for Boone when he's weaned. He smiled to himself and stood. Then we'll get one. The decision settled between them like something long agreed upon. After supper, Margaret sat at the table stringing dried beans for seed, her fingers nimble from years of sowing, mending, and now planting. Callum cleaned his rifle near the hearth, his movements careful but unhurried. The fire snapped low, casting soft gold over the plank walls. She didn't look up when she spoke. Boone's father never raised a hand to him. But I knew it would come if we stayed long enough. Callum set the cloth aside. You don't have to tell me. I want to. He waited. He was never a good man, but he could pretend in front of others. That's what made it hard to leave. Folks didn't believe me when I tried to speak plain. Thought I was just tired or ungrateful? Callum rested his arms on his knees. You don't owe anyone proof of what you lived through. She met his eyes then. I don't feel broken anymore, but I still feel unfinished. He stood and crossed the room, not reaching for her, just standing close enough that she could lean toward him if she wanted. She did. You're not unfinished, he said. You're just beginning. She looked up at him, her voice low. And you, what are you? He took her hand. Ready? That night, she lay beside Boone in the small bedroom and listened to the wind pressing against the shutters. She could hear Callum moving in the next room, the soft thud of boots set aside, the creak of the chair near the fire. She rose quietly, wrapped herself in her shawl, and stepped into the warmth. He was seated, staring into the coals, a tin cup cooling in his hand. He looked up when she entered, but didn't speak. She crossed to him and sat on the floor near his feet, facing the glow. Do you miss your brother still? Every day, he said, but it's not sharp anymore, it's just there. She nodded slowly. I think I'll always carry some of that, but it doesn't weigh the same. He set the cup aside. You've built something here. This place would be hollow without you. She turned to face him. I never thought I'd find a man who didn't want to own me, just walk beside me. I don't want to walk ahead of you, he said. I just want to walk with you. She reached for his hand. He closed his fingers around hers, then leaned down and kissed her. It was slow, sure, and when it ended, her forehead rested against his chest, and neither of them moved. They married in early May. No preacher came. No papers were signed in town. But Margaret stood barefoot in the garden she'd planted, the sun warm on her shoulders, Boone in Callum's arms, and said the words that mattered. Callum said them back, steady as ever. She wore the blue ribbon from her mother's old sewing kit tied in her braid. He wore his Sunday shirt, brushed and buttoned. They stood beneath the cottonwood by the split-rail fence, and the wind carried their vows through the tall grass, unrecorded except by the land. Margaret stitched new curtains for the main room. Callum built a cradle that would last through 3 more children. Boone took his first steps chasing a chicken across the yard, and Callum caught him just before he tumbled into the watering trough. They fenced the pasture and bought 2 cows. Margaret made cheese and butter. Callum rode fence lines and taught Boone how to hold a hammer. In the evenings, they sat on the porch with a quilt over their knees, watching the stars come out. Margaret would rest her head on Callum's shoulder, and he would press a kiss into her hair, quiet and sure. There were hard seasons. Drought one summer, a fever that passed through town, but the cabin stood, the garden held. And they met each day side by side with hands open and hearts awake. Margaret never looked over her shoulder again. She didn't have to. She had built a life from the ashes of another. And in Callum, she had found not rescue, but a home. They grew old there together with Boone strong and kind, the land rich beneath their feet, and the mountains steady in the distance. And every morning, when Callum reached for her hand across the breakfast table, Margaret took it with the same quiet joy as that first time by the fire. Together they stayed. And together they thrived.